Welcome to my eFootball review, where I'll also be comparing the build I played at Konami. I'm sure many of you have tried eFootball 2022, and I can safely say it's the worst football game I've ever played. And I've been gaming since the 80s and have played nearly every football game ever made, and that's including the indie developed games that came on the front of magazines in the 90s. In its current state, there's no aspect of this game that is enjoyable for me. You know it's bad when you don't get any good feeling from scoring a goal, just the relief that you've weathered the storm of poor controls, low responsiveness and general clunky feel to the game to make it even to the penalty box. As many of you know, I've played eFootball 2022 before the launch and have been asked, how do the games differ? And that's what I'm going to help with today and try and explain. Firstly, the graphics, instantly noticeable downgrade from what I played in the Konami headquarters. The soft shadows are gone, the volumetric lighting gone, the turf, the turf is an absolute joke. It's the worst I've seen, and it's not a patch on the build that I played. Camaldino did say that the crowd in the distance looked really poor on the build we played in the Konami headquarters. I generally didn't notice that at the time, but close up during the cutscene celebrations, they look great. I can't even explain how bad the graphics are, but if you watch the video, I'll link at the top of this, then you'll see what I'm talking about. We're talking about PS2 graphics in 2021. Secondly, the audio, the 3D atmosphere is gone, as are the chants. The commentary was terrible in the build I played at Konami, so that's exactly the same as it is here. As I mentioned, there's no part of this game I actually like. The passing, I've tried all different levels and all feel far too loose and random in one aspect or another. Level 3, the through balls feel so powerful even with low power. Level 1, the passes are just far too slow. Level 2 is the sort of sweet spot for me as a predominantly PA1 player on PES 2021. FUMA felt fine, although there needs to be added weight to the through balls on all the levels of passing. The shooting feels unrewarding, the goalies are awful, the player ID is non-existent. Overall, just a very, very poor game, along with the replays, which are no higher than 20 frames per second at times. The gameplay as a whole package is absolutely awful, but it is compounded by so many bugs. The ball hovering off the ground, players disappearing, referees face planting the grass. Honestly, just click on the link in the description of this video and you're going to see just how bad things can get. In comparison to the build I played, this feels much faster and there's certainly a lack of player momentum, so players just sort of fly around here, there and everywhere, whereas it's a much more realistic and slow paced build that I played in the Konami office, so I definitely preferred that. They're talking about putting a fix out in October, and if you think they're going to take out the current build that we've got and make changes to it within a couple of weeks, you're totally wrong. I believe that the build we've played now is a much older build from perhaps June or July, and they're going to use the build that we played at Konami office, which, whilst not the greatest game of all time or better than PES 2021 as I've already mentioned in the past, it is a very good base and I did get some enjoyment out of it. The build might be more advanced than what we played, as you know, they've had a little bit more time to work on it and balance the sharp kicks, as they don't want every pass and shot to be a sharp kick, which is understandable. So let's just take a look at my feedback score sheet and compare the current build 0.90 to the build I played, and this will give you some idea on what's better and what's worse. So I'm going to leave a link in the description of this video to this eFootball 2022 score sheet. So basically what happened was I played the new build at Konami, and then I went along and scored every sort of aspect of the game in this sort of format. And you know, there was more to it than this, but these are the key points, and I've sort of narrowed it down a little bit so it's a bit more easy on the eye. So we've got the new build here that I played at the Konami office, and then we've got the build that everyone's playing right now, which is the 0.90 build, and basically I scored it on a 0 to 5 rating, 5 being the best and 0 being the worst. And we've got over here the attacking controls, we've got the comments regarding the 0.90 build, and then we've got the new build comments over here. So the first up is the shielding. You know, I've scored it as 0 because I find that this can highlight serious bugs. I'm pretty sure when the defending player is holding the physicality button and the attacking player is holding the shield button, this is when we're getting a lot of weird stuff going on, and that's why it's happening so frequently. But in the build that I played at the Konami office, the shielding was perfect. I had so many great moments with it. Like I said in my sort of review before, I would say, where I talked about the way Martinez sort of shielded the ball. He positioned his body around to one side of the ball as he was running towards goal with it. But because I held it down a little bit too much, the distance between him and the ball get far too big, and then the goalkeeper was able to jump out and scoop up the ball. But it was just the feeling that it just felt so natural and intuitive. Just felt really, really, really good on the new build. But on the build we're playing right now, it's just a mess. The ball touch control, to be honest, I've tried to activate it in the current build, and I just don't see any animations or new animations to make me think, oh, that's the new build. That's the new ball touch control. I just look at it and think, what the hell? It definitely wasn't in the new build version that we played in the Konami office, so it wasn't available then. They even made it, they even told us beforehand it wasn't going to be in that build. As for the dash, I would say that this is probably as good as you'd expect it. When you double tap the dash to knock the ball ahead, that actually works much better than it did in the new build. I felt in the new build there wasn't much of enough difference between how far the player kicked the ball out in front of them, and it didn't make any difference to the speed. So that was a slight improvement, I would say, from me. The sharp kicks obviously wasn't included, and this was a massive loss for sure. And maybe you could get some enjoyment if sharp kicks was in, but even then, it's not as it is. Even with sharp kicks, it wouldn't have saved it, to be honest, from this review. The kick feints, I didn't really use them all that much in the new build. I don't think I've ever used them at all, to be honest. So I put not applicable there. I didn't really use it. The kick feints in the build we're currently playing, I did actually notice some new animations where the player sort of steps over the ball if you change the direction quickly in the penalty box, which was quite nice to see. So that's why I gave it a 4. The through ball, the low through balls, I find, I talked about the different pass support levels before. I didn't find any sort of sweet spots for getting the through balls as I want them. I find like if a player is really close to you, pressing the through ball button would just knock it out of play. So yeah, I would. That's why I've scored it a 2 for both of those. The lofted pass, I felt this was much improved over the new build. The new build was far too floaty in terms of the ball physics, whereas the lofted pass felt much like PES 2021, if I'm being totally honest. The crossing in this build we're playing currently just seems all over the place. It will curl outwards, it will curl inwards, and not exactly where you want the ball to actually go. It just doesn't seem to have any sort of control on it. So I've given it a 1, whereas on the new build, it was pretty much the same as PES 2021, if I'm being totally honest, so exactly the same. The low pass it's pretty awful, isn't it? I can't really find a sweet spot. Level 1 is just the passes are way too soft. Probably Fuma was okay for me personally. The power shooting, you didn't really get like a feel of a zip to the power shots, and certainly missed the sharp kicks. But they weren't all that great either on the new build. I found that, I was utilizing the sharp kicks just to get any sort of power in my shots. The finesse shots, absolutely awful. Both builds were too slow and floaty, but I scored a goal from about 20-25 yards and went in so slow. That's why I knocked it down to 1. It just doesn't feel right to me. The chip shot, I've not really used that, to be honest. I have changed my controls recently to use the haptic feedback of the shielding and the physicality buttons when it's implemented. So I'm going through a bit of a learning curve there. So I'm not really using the chip shots as much as I perhaps would. The player movement on the left analytic, in the build we're currently playing, the players were far less weighty. There's no momentum, and players can literally stop on a dime. The left stick finesse dribbling did feel fine though, so only 1 point for that in the current build. Whereas the new build, the players were much heavier, and that just allowed skills to work a little bit more effectively. In terms of the skills, I find them far less responsive, and the AI on Superstar didn't seem to fall for as many as they did on the build that I played. When it comes to the defending controls, so the physicality defending, again, like I said, with the shielding button, it just seems to cause some serious bugs as the players collide. So a 0 for physical defending. The dash, I put here, players stop much quicker with less momentum impacting them. So again, the speed of the game is pretty crazy considering all that's going on. So they just need to tone down the speed just a fraction. I did actually try different speeds on the game. I went from, I've tried +2, I tried +1, tried 0, tried -1 and -2. Only -1 and 0 were the game speeds that I'd recommend, but I think -1 was still a little tad too slow. I would say probably the gameplay is somewhere in between 0 and 1 for the new build, if I was to say. But yeah, it's a difficult one to score. As for the cursor changes, I find this so much worse. Like, my cursor was just not going to the players I wanted, and the right stick, which I'll touch on in a bit, didn't help either. The goalkeeper pull, I didn't really use this feature at all, but I'm pretty sure it'll be fine. The sliding tackles, pretty much the same as the new build. I felt like the sliding tackles go exactly where you want them to go, and there is a degree of intelligence with the players. Same for the standing tackle, exactly the same. The matchup, I felt actually worked much better. In fact, I'm going to give that here I put, like, it's either a 3 or 4 depending on your view. I gave it a 3 because I don't want the defending to be assisted. But if you do prefer that assistance, then you're probably going to score it a 4. Whereas the defending on the new build was way harder than what we've experienced. The goalkeeper selection felt fine. You can pick up the goalkeeper relatively quick, and the saves seem really responsive too. The right stick player selection was way worse than the new build. It seemed far less responsive and less accurate in terms of the player you wanted to select. The player ID, absolutely non-existent in both builds. You still got Neuer in both builds coming off his line, but other than that, I've seen players run side by side, the same arm movement. So the ball physics, I would say slightly improved, mainly because of the lofted passes were much less floaty in the build we're currently playing, whereas in the new build, the lofted passes were far too floaty. The player weightiness, I gave that a 1. I said there's barely any weight to the players, and they can stop on a dime, as I said before, and it renders the skills less useful when you're trying to attack your opponent, because they can literally just turn and deal with whatever you're going to throw at them in terms of the skills. The player speed, I also gave this a point down because they're much faster with quicker stopping distances again. The seamless play was pretty bad compared to the build that I played. There was even some still black screens and screen freezes whilst the game is still ongoing. As you probably saw in my 7-hour stream, it was dreadful. And I've actually highlighted that in the video that I'm going to link as well at the start of this video. Tactics, same as the new build. They're very, very sparse. There's no depth to them at all. You can adjust the defensive line using the D-pad, and double tapping the D-pad will activate your offside trap. But, it's very, very basic and very, very clunky. I would say one thing, though, is that in the new build, it felt a little bit, it didn't feel as smooth when you're like dropping down between the actual players on the pitch to the players on the subs bench. I found it very, very sort of like the frames per second dipped a little bit there, but that has been addressed in this build. But I've given it the same score, as it's not enough to change that. The dual camera, I found that awful, as the same as the new build, but possibly even worse. I just felt like zooming in and out far too frequently. My eyes were all over the place on that dual camera. The direct wide camera is probably the best for gameplay and ease of use. The stadium cam, it looks the best for playing, but it also is one of the most difficult to play with if you're not used to it. So it can take a little bit of getting used to. And then the collisions and fouls, they're pretty bad in the new build, but it's way worse. Some of the things that we've seen in my 7 hours of playing compared to the 2 hours I played, I never saw any of the craziness in the 2 hours that I played. I spoke to Barry, he said the same. So Barry's from Pez Universe, you know, the Midnight Kid. And he said it's the same. You know, he said he had 5 hours playing it. I had 2 hours playing it, and we didn't notice any of the craziness that we've seen crop up on my 7-hour stream. So for the broadcast camera, I've not really tested this. Something I need to definitely look at is a defending manual. I would say, you know, compared to the new build, I said yes, very much so. But in the current build, it's much less, you know, manual. You can just literally hold the physical button down along with the matchup, and you'll close the distance to your opponent. Is there pressing? Yep. So the physical button will do that for you. And is there a secondary press? No, and I didn't miss it either in both builds. There's a lot to get through there, and like I said, I'll leave a link to this score sheet so you can read it for yourself and take your time to go through the scores and read all my comments. The only thing I would say is, if you take a look at the launch trailer, which I'm going to put up now, if you look at this sort of resembles more of the build that we played than the build that's been released. I mean, if you look at the lighting and everything on the players' faces, you just don't get that in the current build. It looks much improved. Don't get me wrong, the pitch at close up does not look great, but from a distance, when you're playing in the normal cameras, the dynamic wide, the stadium camera, the pitch looks really good. The volumetric lighting looks really good. The soft shadows look really good. So that's going to be a massive step up from what we've experienced so far. I expect one of the builds to get released as soon as possible. I imagine they're probably putting it through to Sony right now to get uploaded on the PlayStation Store and obviously Xbox stores as well. So we may see significant changes in the next week or two, and I'm certainly looking forward to that. And I'll have this review for this build, and then we'll do another review for that build, and hopefully it would have bridged the gap, and we can add to this spreadsheet and add the different build numbers, and we can compare and see where the game's improving, where it's dropping down. And I think it's going to be, I would say keep your faith, guys. Keep your faith, because, you know, the build that I played at Konami isn't that bad. Is it better than FIFA 22? Not for me, not in the lower difficulty, the lower divisions. But if you compare it to like Man City playing PSG on FIFA 22, then it probably is for me, because it's a much slower paced game. It's much more realistic. And I actually did get some enjoyment out of the new build, and it's something I would play. Whereas if I was expected to play a Master League on this current build, 0.90, I simply just won't do that, because it's just not worth playing. Anyway, that's all from me, ladies and gents. Thanks for letting me ramble on, and hopefully you enjoyed this review. If I was to score this game, I'd probably give it a 1 out of 10. The fact that it doesn't crash on launch is probably the only reason I'd give it a 1. So there we are, ladies and gents. Thanks for joining me, and take care. Bye-bye.